Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. In this episode, as the title implies, we'll be upgrading all our applications, our .NET applications, to ASP.NET Core 3.0. So until now we've been working on 2.2. Don't remember if we started on 2.1 or 2.2, I think it was 2.2, but 3.0 has been out for a while now. So it's more than time to upgrade. So we'll take a few steps. The episode is probably be a bit boring, but maybe it's useful for someone with some problem while upgrading. So I won't be doing it now. It is already done at the time I'm recording the video. So we'll take a look at the changes I've made. So look at some Git diffs and then looking at some code and going why some changes were made. But basically, we're going to upgrade to .NET Core and ASP.NET Core 3.0. We'll go the basic stuff and other quick bits. Then we'll take a look at the fact that some packages were extracted from the ASP.NET Core shared framework. We'll take a look at the transition from iWebhost to iHost, endpoint routing, so the segregation of MVC components, or as the ASP.NET Core guys are calling it, Project Houdini, which is kind of making MVC disappear without removing the features. And just take a quick look at the breaking change in route resolution for async actions. As usual, if the videos are being useful, consider liking, sharing, and leaving feedback. I guess the third one is the most important to improve the videos, but the other ones are also nice to make the channel grow. And for more info, remember that I also post an accompanying article to each video. So many, besides explaining everything that I explained in the video for quicker reference, I also put there a bunch of references from a bunch of sites that I used to grab all the information. You can check out Twitter and ping me if you need to ask some question or something like that. Or if you want an alternative contact, you can check out also the blog again or check out my personal website. With that in mind, let's go. So, to start, like I mentioned in the blog, I will put all the references, but the most important reference, I guess, is this one from the docs, with a lot of information regarding migration to ASP.NET Core 2.2 to 3.0. So in this episode, I will only talk about the things I needed in my case to migrate, but there are of course much more things, or at least a bunch more things that may require your attention, that because I didn't touch it. So this is a good reference file to check out a lot of these things regarding ASP.NET Core. And of course, for some of the things I've made, I came here to find out what I needed to do. Others already added some ideas. But yeah, this is a great reference with a lot of important information. So let's begin with the basics. I guess I'll start with checking the differences. So the most basic of things is going to CSproj, or the CSproj. Where is it? This is for a library. I upgraded the library to .NET Standard 2.1 just for one simple reason, because this library targets Entity Framework Core, and Entity Framework Core 3.0 requires .NET Standard 2.1. This will be reverted in 3.1, I guess, because it makes it harder for people which were trying to migrate. So if we go here to GitHub, so of course 3.1 will target .NET Standard 2.0. So this will give people at least one more year to migrate things. While, for instance, that's because .NET Framework 4.8 is stuck on 2.0. So if people are in the .NET Framework want to use EF Core 3.0, they can't. But if they, when it comes out 3.1, they will be able to again, at least for another year, because I don't expect this to last forever. Probably when .NET 5 and the other ones come out, this will be over, but at least for another year, it will get back to .NET Standard 2.0. But for now, it needs 2.1, and in our project we don't really have that problem, so I just bumped the version to .NET Standard 2.1. For the web application, I bumped it up to 3.0. So this is the most important part and the simplest part. Of course, we need this. Other things. One thing, for instance, is this ASP.NET Core App, which is the meta package or the shared framework. So where the common packages that ASP.NET Core requires live or are referenced by. This I removed because it's no longer needed. When we use this SDK web, this is implicit, so we don't need to add it. Let me check my sheets. So, okay, so no need for the package reference. I'll get back here later. This is another change. Entity Framework Core Postgres provider no longer uses this, but this isn't even a breaking change. It was when building, it gives obsolete, so it would work, but it's better to just target the new things. If we go to startup, let me go to code here, source startups. If I go up here, this is a very slight change, so it's hard to check. But previously we had iHosting environment. No. Yeah, we had iHosting environment, and this is an error because I'm not using the correct using statements. But this is deprecated in favor of iHost environment. And besides iHost environment, there's also a new iWebhost environment, which inherits from iHost environment. So we can check it out here. So this inherits from this one and just adds a couple of web specific things. And this is in line with this inheritance is in line with the iWebhost to iHost transition, but we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that was deprecated, so iHost environment is the new thing. And package reference, okay. Yeah, okay, just I had a note, which is probably not that interesting, but if in this CS proj, I removed the app, so the shared framework. If I wanted to keep using targeting, for instance, when we use this SDK, let me just put it here. It's better if we go to the docs. So by using this one, like I said, we don't need to put the app. But if, for instance, we were doing another kind of application, we needed to put this. But now it isn't a package reference anymore; it's a framework reference. So this changed. keep that in mind if you need it. In my case, I didn't need it, so I just removed it, but if you need it, this changed. Okay, so for the basics, we'll get back here, so close. So for the basics, we are done. Basics and quick stuff. Now for packages extracted from the shared framework. So if we go to over here, you'll notice that in the package reference, this is group management. You'll see in package reference, we have JWT bearer. And if we go over here, we didn't. So authentication providers were removed, so we must reference the package that contains them. And what else? Let me check. Let's go see the auth project. This has more changes. So notice that before we didn't have Entity Framework Core reference because it was part of the shared package, the meta package. Now it is not. So we need to reference Entity Framework Core explicitly. I think the reasoning for this was to make it the same experience to upgrade Entity Framework Core. So for instance, if we were in .NET Core 2.2 or ASP.NET Core 2.2 and upgrade it to 3, we would get Entity Framework Core 3 and we couldn't do anything about it. But maybe we want to target the previous version because there are some breaking changes that we are not ready yet to tackle. This was impossible. Besides the ASP.NET Core breaking changes, we also needed to take care of Entity Framework and all of that. So by removing the reference, we can target explicitly what we want. So I think this was the main reasoning. Let me check here. I think I had a note about that. Yeah, I think that was the main reasoning. But as usual, the explanation is available in the docs. So depending. Oh yeah, so it was different because also SQL Server clients and all of that. So those are the main reasons why they removed it. So for what we need to do is add the package reference to Entity Framework Core. Other things, I think over here not much. But then let's take a look at the web frontend history, CS project. So authentication again. In the group management, we needed to add a reference to the JWT bearer authentication method, and in here we need OpenID Connect. So those were extracted, and we need to add it. So like I said, this episode will be a bit boring. We'll just go through the main changes that were needed here. Not here, here. So packages extracted. And now iWebHost to iHost. So this, we don't really need to go to Git. If we go to the program, what changed? But we could go here to the program. Mostly what changed is before we were using this iWebHost builder, and now we are using this iHost builder, which is the generic version that already existed. If we wanted to do some Windows services or background services running on Docker, stuff like that, gRPC, all of that, listening on a queue, those kinds of things. So in 3.0, because host, iHost and iWebhost were different things. Kind of consolidated everything together. So we use a iHost builder and the corresponding iHost, and when we configure the host, we can also configure the web host part. So basically we do the web host, and then this part is similar to that part. So this should make it simpler for in the same application to host everything at the same time. Should be simpler. So not a great difference, but just keep in mind it changed a little bit. Now the next one is probably the most visible part. These two ones are probably the most visible, and so let's take a look. What is endpoint routing? Let's see. So endpoint routing is not new. It was introduced in 2.2, but it wasn't as visible. So, but without going over all of this, the main goal is to extract routing out of MVC, because routing was only part of MVC. So we couldn't make use of the routing capabilities of ASP.NET Core outside of MVC. So for instance, if we were in a middleware, we have no idea to what route the application will eventually, the request will eventually be routed. So let me go to startup where we can see this and how this works. So look over here with endpoint routing. We now call this use routing, which means that from this point forward of the middleware pipeline, we know to which route will the request eventually be mapped, and that route might not be an MVC action. It can be another thing, and then these parts are the same. For instance, these two, use authentication and use authorization, should come after use routing. So these middlewares are able to know if what's the route. So for instance, by knowing the route, the use authorization can check if the current user is authorized to go to that route. That was something that previously was done at the MVC level. So if we go check the code, let's see for the group management, for instance, and in the service call extensions, if we take a look over here, when we were configuring MVC, so over here at MVC core, we had an options, and over here we prepared the authorization policy. So this was made in MVC because it was the only way to know where the request would end up being routed. Now we don't need that, because as routing logic was extracted, we can use it outside of MVC. So in this case, we could have left it in the same place because it was working and we are using MVC components, but it could not be. So let's check this out. So use routing. So any middleware from there forward will know the route that was matched, if any. Sometimes if there's a route and it ends up on this app run, there is no route, so it wouldn't know. But assuming it matched a route, these middlewares and anything that we put afterwards will be able to know what's the route. And then use endpoints is where we configure the endpoints that will be matched by the use routing. So these map controllers, for now, ignore it. Assume this means map MVC, and we'll take a look at it later. And what this basically means is that it's putting MVC routes, registering them in the use endpoints. So when use routing is called, is able to know where to go. And a feature that we get because of this is this, for instance, require authorization. Previously, like I mentioned, we needed to do this inside MVC. Now we can call it directly in something that goes here. In this case, there are controllers, MVC, but in the future, there can be, let me check, endpoint dot use or map. Let's try with this map get, and this is a pattern. Didn't try this one, so require authorization. So basically we are saying that for this context dot stat response dot status code equals 500 because reasons. So we can map some other endpoint and say I want authorization to work on this endpoint, and this is just a basic middleware, not MVC, and I can take advantage of this authorization without writing some other middlewares like I've done in the past and are still present. I'll probably need to revisit that, but like you see, we can, this puts other things. So it extracts functionality out of MVC into the broader ASP.NET Core, so we can use it in other ways. And this is related to the next topic, which is make MVC disappear. But I think this is the gist of endpoint routing, is to make routing available outside MVC, and with that build new things without needing everything in there. And it was already present in ASP.NET Core 2.2, but it was only being used internally still by MVC. So they're taking little steps. So let's look at this part. Like I mentioned, besides endpoint routing, there are segregation of MVC components. What does this mean? I think you can kind of guess, because here instead of MVC we have map controllers, and in the when we are configuring this one, I have add controllers. So let's check the auth service, which has more things. We use Razor pages and controllers. So if we go here, MVC extensions, and as you see, I'm doing add controllers with views. So in the other place I was just adding controllers because I just need the controllers for the API. In this case, because I want views, I created add controllers with views, and also added Razor pages. So the things are being split up, so we can use just what we need instead of doing MVC and everything comes. If you remember, in the group management API, I didn't do add MVC, I did add MVC core and added just the things I wanted. But it was harder, a little bit harder to go through. I had to go through all the GitHub repo for the I'll check a couple of files on the GitHub repo for ASP.NET Core to find out what I needed and what I didn't. With this in place, it's easier for us to see what we need. So in case of the services, these two, And if we go to the startup, again, endpoint routing. So use routing here, everything in between over here. And then on the endpoints, I'm mapping the default controller route. So this is equivalent to doing app.use MVC with default route equivalent for the controllers. This only maps the controllers, but allows me to not set the routes explicitly. In the API project, I'm setting them, so I just did map controllers. In this case, I'm doing map default controller route, which sets the controllers and sets up the default stuff. And map razor pages, so it's split up. I don't know if there's a method that does everything for us. Map, don't know. Yeah, but you can see there's a lot of maps already here. So map hub is for, how is it called? Singular, Blazor, gRPC, I don't know if it's here, maybe not. But you get the point. So we can map things individually, and MVC is being broken into pieces, so it's easier to use just the parts that we want. And they are calling that Project Houdini because it's making MVC disappear, although all the features are still there. So just one quick thing remaining, which is breaking change in route resolution of async actions, which is a mouthful, but basically, let me check where I put that. I think it's in, yeah, if we go to the group management API, go to the groups controller, and let's start over here, groups controller. Yeah. So on the create group over in the add sync, when we create a group, what I was doing here directly was do created add action and just did name of get by ID async. This no longer works because the routes now ignore the async part. So we need to remove the async part. That's why over here I created this name, which is basically name of that, and replace async. I could just write this there directly, but I like to use the name of to keep things easier to refactor. So I created this this constant here, replacing the async with nothing, just because of that. But besides that, it works the same, but because the async is ignored, let me check. I'm pretty sure in the breaking changes there's the information. Yeah, async suffix removal from controller action. So before it was we put list async, now we put list. It's a bit annoying to be the breaking change, and we can avoid this, but I just went ahead and fixed what needed. And I think that's it. Looking at this part, that's the more important stuff. I probably went fast, but the episode would be boring anyway, so better to go fast. And if you have doubts, ask away or check the post, which you can read at your own pace. But don't have any problem. Ask away in the comments or on Twitter or the other contacts I mentioned. And remember, this document is really cool. It's huge. Okay, maybe not huge. It's just that I'm using a giant font. But take a look in there, because many problems you may have probably are there. But if you still have questions, try me. I probably won't know everything, but at least the things that I try to explain in this episode, I should have a clue. So, thanks for stopping by, and hope to see you in the next one. See yous!